Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai, and welcome everyone to today's webinar from Lithuania to Aotearoa, the global and local case for comprehensive alcohol policy reform. Ko Jason Alexander taku ingoa, huri hau no te tai tokerau, and I'm pleased to open today's session as one of the friendly board members from Health Coalition Aotearoa. This is the fourth webinar in HCA's Investing in Prevention series. And our moderator or our host today is Jesse Witiri, Ngāti Whakaoe, and Ngāti Ngāhere. Jesse, amongst many other things, is the advocacy lead at Ki Tua o Matariki, a board member of Alcohol Health Watch, and a rising leader in the alcohol harm reduction space. She brings strong advocacy experience, kaupapa Māori grounding, and a deep commitment to healthier and more equitable communities. Jessie will introduce our speakers and guide today's discussion, but before I pass it over to her, I'll open us with a short karakia. Whakatake te hau ki turu, whakatake te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kene kene ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora. Kia ora, Jessie.
Mauri ora, tēnā koe, Jace, ko koe tō tātou kai kariki ai tēnei ata I mihi nui ana kia koe. O tira, tēnā tātou katoa, mōrena everybody, te hunga e whakarongo mai ana. To those of you who are just joining our webinar on behalf of the Health Coalition Aotearoa, we welcome you today. Thank you for jumping on, and we hope you learn some pretty cool things out of our webinar this morning. As Jace said, let's get right into introducing the panelists. Our panelists are Daniela Correia, a consultant and alcohol harm researcher who advised the World Health Organization in Europe. Joining us as well, we have Dr. Sarah Herbert, Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa. She has a background in critical health psychology with expertise in Māori health equity and Te Tiriti o Waitangi aligned health system transformation. She's Tumuaki Māori and Head of Equity and Advocacy at the Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners. We also have online Dr. Anya Mizrak, a public health researcher at University Otago, Wellington. Anya specialises in computer modelling and data analysis to provide evidence on how different health issues affect people. Her research spans alcohol, transport, physical activity, COVID-19, and nutrition. E mihi nui ana kia koutou kua taimai, our speakers this morning, doctors, our tohunga, mōrena kia koutou. The format today, for those of us listening, will be a presentation from each of our panelists with time for audience questions at the end. We invite you to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. Any questions that we don't get to in the webinar today will be answered by email after the webinar, so make sure to keep an eye on your inboxes. Let's welcome our first speaker. We're setting the scene with Daniela. In the early 2000s, Lithuania had some of the highest rates of alcohol consumption and alcohol attributable deaths in Europe. Starting in 2007, the government implemented a series of strong alcohol control policies. World Health Organization alcohol advisor Daniela Correia will take us through what those changes were and what they achieved, including record low alcohol consumption in 2023 and a reduction in all-case mortality. Before we bring our speaker on, we can't see, just a whakamarama for you guys that have joined on, the panelists cannot see your faces. So I am channeling good energy through the screen right now. I'm hoping everybody's smiling and everybody's bringing good vibes to welcome in our first speaker, who is dialing in from a different part of our ao, a different part of our world. So Daniela, Morena, could you please tell us how Lithuania achieved these impressive results?
Thank you very much, Jessie. It's an honor to be here today, and let me just try to share my screen because I prepared a presentation. Yeah, sending in requests. So it's a great honor to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm joining from almost off of the world, from the other part of the world. And today I am just sharing my screen. I hope you can see it. So I'm here today to talk about Lithuania and the alcohol control policies in Lithuania, what was done and what changed. So for the next 10 minutes, I will walk you through what actually happened in Lithuania and what were the results that we saw coming out of it. So, first of all, let me just give you a brief introduction of Lithuania, because it's very far from you. It's basically on the other side of the world, but Lithuania is a very small country in the northern or eastern part of Europe, in the Baltic, by the Baltic Sea, that has a population of approximately 2.8 million people. Lithuania declared their independence from the Soviet Union in 1990, and later in 2004, they joined the European Union. And in the early 2000s, Lithuania had one of the highest alcohol consumption rates per capita in the world, and the highest in Europe. And this was a little bit driven by the typical drinking pattern in Northern and Eastern Europe. That is basically a pattern where people drink a lot, but on specific occasions. So it's not a regular daily drinking habit. It's like episodic drinking with very, very high levels of drinking when that happens, and sometimes for a very long periods of time. So they drink sometimes for several days on a row. And it's a culture that it's more or less accepted, and being intoxicated is more or less accepted in Lithuania. And because of that, it has a very high alcohol attributable mortality, because people drink very much in a very short occasion. And what I want to show you first is what is probably the most famous figure on alcohol control in Lithuania. So this is what I'm showing you here is like what is called a butterfly plot. You don't have to interpret it very in very detail. I just want to explain that it's called a butterfly plot because it's kind of mirrored. And what you see is that whenever alcohol consumption goes up, and alcohol consumption here is the line in blue, what happens to life expectancy, that is the line in gray, is that it goes down. And the correlation is really high and negative, meaning that when one increases, the other decreases, and vice versa. But what I want to use this plot to show you today is to kind of give you a brief history of what happened in Lithuania. So when Lithuania joined the EU around 2004, what happened is that there was a liberalization of alcohol control policies, yes, and because of that, affordability started increasing. And when affordability started increasing, consumption increased with it, until around the year 2007 and 2008, when Lithuania first implemented some alcohol control measures. And that was reflecting in a decrease in alcohol consumption that was reflected also in an increase in life expectancy. But because these restrictions were quite mild, it didn't stay for long. And after some period, alcohol consumption increased again. And by 2016, Lithuania had the highest alcohol consumption in the region and one of the highest in the world, at some astonishing 14 liters of pure alcohol per capita per adult. And well, this was not very well received at first by the government of Lithuania. They did not believe the estimates of WHO, but after some discussions and after crossing it with national data, it was soon understood that the values were actually true and that something needed to be done. So Lithuania implemented for the first time very severe alcohol control measures, and in a very short period of time. So basically they implemented all 3 WHO best buys on alcohol control in a period shorter than in a year. The first one was in March 2017, when alcohol excise taxes were increased by more than 100% for wine and beer, and for more than 30% for spirits, and more than 90% for intermediate products, which led to a reduction in affordability of alcoholic beverages and a real increase in price of alcoholic beverages. And a few months later, in January 2018, Lithuania implemented 2 other major alcohol, actually 3 major alcohol alcohol control policies. So one of them was that they reduced the sales of alcohol on Sundays. Before the law, it was possible to buy alcohol in a window of 14 hours, and that window was reduced for just 5 hours. So sales on Sundays were severely reduced. And on the rest of the week, sales were also reduced from 14 hours to around 10 hours. That was one of the major availability measures that was implemented. The other availability measure that was implemented is that legal alcohol purchase age increased, the minimum legal alcohol purchasing age increased from 18 to 20-year-olds for all beverages. And the third major alcohol control policy that was implemented was a full ban on alcohol marketing and advertisement in all platforms, including TV, radio, internet, social media, outdoors, sponsoring in sports, etc., etc. And this is actually been proved to be properly implemented and enforced, meaning that actually alcohol advertisement was disappeared from all Lithuanian products and Lithuanian media. So this was what happened in Lithuania. But what I want to actually show you was the main results that research could prove that were caused by these alcohol control policies. And those were, first of all, that taxation and availability restrictions actually reduced mortality, and that happened very quickly. So just for you to have an idea, following the 2017 policy package, cirrhosis mortality fell almost 30%, and the effect was almost immediate. Also, we saw that there was a 13% reduction in all-cause mortality inequalities, especially among men, because what happened is that mortality decreased even more among lower educated groups than among higher educated groups, shortening the gap between the several socioeconomic groups in the country. The second result that I want to show you is that restricting hours, sales hours, actually changed when men died. So this is one of my personally favorite results because it's very intuitive and almost visible because as you can see here in this plot, what happened before the intervention, the availability intervention where alcohol sales were reduced, is that before the intervention on Sundays, there was a peak in mortality caused by external causes, and external causes here involves things like injuries, accidents, etc., etc. And on Mondays, there was a peak in mortality from cardiovascular diseases. And this happened, so let me just remind you that the availability were imposed mostly on Sundays, and the idea here was to prevent what is called zapoi in Lithuania, that is a habit or a cultural habit, that is people start drinking on Fridays and they drink through all the weekend and continue to be drunk for a very long period of time, like sometimes for the whole weekend. And what happens is that during the weekend, the injuries and on Monday, after several days of drinking nonstop, cardiovascular mortality increases. And the idea of restricting sales on Sundays was exactly to make sure that there was kind of a break in drinking, that people could stop drinking and they did not drink continuously. And what we can see is that after the intervention, the 2 years after, that peak on mortality on Sundays and Mondays completely disappeared. And actually, what we can see is that the weekly pattern of mortality changed almost immediately after this intervention. The third point that I want to make is about the marketing ban and show you that the marketing ban actually reduced alcohol use within less than a year. So for this, we did an analysis using data from the European School Survey Project on Alcohol and Other Drugs. This is basically a study that happens in all Europe every 4 years, where adolescents that are aged 15 or 16 are questioned about their link to alcohol and drugs. And what we see is that basically in this plot that you see here, you see that in 2007, Lithuania had the highest intoxication rate among the 6 countries that we included in the study. The 6 countries, by the way, are countries that are neighboring to Lithuania or that had some alcohol control policies that needed to be included in the study so we can account for them. So in 2007, Lithuania had the highest frequency of intoxication, and in 2019, it had the lowest. And we wanted to know if this was due to the marketing ban or if it was partially explained by the marketing ban or not. And what we did was, after accounting for the secular trends that the general trends that we see in Europe going throughout the years, after accounting for differences in individual characteristics of adolescents in the different countries, after accounting for all the other alcohol control policies that we have discussed before, even after all of that, the marketing ban was associated with a 35% reduction in frequency of intoxication of adolescents. It was also associated with a decrease in binge drinking and a decrease in general use of alcohol. And moreover, what we see in this study is that had the ban not been implemented, the intoxication rates in 2019 in Lithuania would not have been as low as you see here. That is the blue dot. They would have been much higher, and they would have been around the other countries like Latvia and Poland and Italy. And to finalize my points or my results, my final point is that these policies also made economic sense. So a study that shows the return on investment of the alcohol excise taxation in 2017 shows that for each euro that Lithuania invested in implementing this taxation, Lithuania gained 420 euros. And this comes because the reductions the reductions of costs associated to alcohol from the society were much higher than any implementation cost that can be accounted for, because we have reductions in healthcare, we have reductions in productivity loss, we have reductions in criminal justice. And apart from all of that, we are gaining money because we are increasing, or the government is gaining revenue because they are increasing the tax rates. So this shows that even though alcohol control policies are very often debated as a public health question, they are also a very sound economic investment. And yeah, so these are my conclusions. Conclusions are that a comprehensive and integrated package on alcohol control policies actually produce measurable reductions in alcohol consumption, in mortality, and in health inequalities. One of the things that we saw in Lithuania is that enforcement and completeness of policies matter. So it means having not only an integrated package is better than not having an integrated package, but also that partial restrictions not always work, because industry adapts very, very easily. And if they see a place where they can go, they will go there. And something that is also very interesting is that Lithuania is used in Europe as our country, our champion country, and that has been motivating countries in the region to move into similar directions. That's it from my side. Thank you so much. And I'll stop sharing now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniela. And just again, sending my mihi, my appreciations for you for joining us all the way on the other side of the world. E mihi nui ana kia koe. I took a few notes. So you said that Lithuania lifted the drinking age, that you created a marketing ban, you restricted sale hours, and all of these three things you've proven worked. I guess we do have a pātai for you. How did the Lithuanian government stand strong against the alcohol industry and its lobbying tactics?
Well, it definitely wasn't easy. Even though Lithuania does not have like the most aggressive or well-established alcohol lobbying in Europe, like for example, as wine-producing countries like Portugal or Spain or France, and also beer-producing countries like Germany or Austria, it was still a big fight. What I think that the most important part was that there was a genuine political will to change, and that was mostly because we had these policies were championed by a coalition of Ministry of Health and Public Health advocates. And in particular, the Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health, they had a very important role in this change. The Minister of Health at the time was a previous academic and a public health researcher, so he was very pro changes in alcohol policy, and he served as a strong champion and as a target to industry, and he stood very strongly and made it go further. So one of the things that was very important is to have a champion that is really willing to go forward with it. And also, there was also a very strong parliamentary support at the time in Lithuania, because there had been just a new government in Lithuania at the time that was a little bit more liberal than usual, and they were supporting this change for alcohol control policies. Actually, after a few years, the government changed. A more conservative government came into Lithuania, and one of the ideas that they had was to decrease, for example, alcohol taxation again. And obviously industry was lobbying very, very strongly for that. But actually, in this case, science was able to hold the line, because what happened was that science was able to convince the minister and the government at the time that if they did so, the costs would be much higher, and in particular, they would lose a lot of revenue. So yeah, so I would say the best thing for stand against the alcohol industry is to have strong evidence and to have good champions to give you support for going further with alcohol control policies.
Incredible advocacy and evidence-based research. E mihi nui ana kia koe, Daniela. I do see we have 2 questions popped up from Louise and Liz. We will have time for our panelists to come back and answer your questions at the end. If we don't have time to them on this call right now, they will be emailed to you. So e mihi nui ana, Daniela, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to move into our next speaker, e hoa ma. We have Sarah, Dr. Sarah Morena. Are you on? I can see you, your pretty face. Could you please talk to us through Māori-led examples where there have been successful shifts in alcohol use through tikanga and Māori leadership, and how that offers potential in broader Aotearoa?
Sure, Morena. I'm going to open with a whakataukī, which informs what I'm going to share more of this morning. Titiro whakamuri, kōkiri whakamua. And so when I think about the ways in which Māori have navigated multiple responses and leadership to alcohol and alcohol harms, we must look to the past and what's been achieved in order to forge ahead. So it's likely not surprising to anyone here that alcohol was an introduced product in Aotearoa. Our tipuna referred to it as waipiro, and it was never a part of te ao Māori or our Māori cultures prior to colonisation. So alcohol brought with it a harm that Māori did not create and have never wanted. And when we look to our history, we can see Māori leadership has long sought to reverse the harms from alcohol through tikanga, through rangatiratanga and long-standing advocacy. And I'm just going to spend a moment running us through a brief historical account of highlighting examples of rangatiratanga in working to prohibit alcohol and reduce harm. And it starts as early as 1835. We had a group of rangatira in Hokianga who drove prohibition in their rohe, which was one of perhaps the most earliest recorded prohibition initiatives. We could see through the kingitanga leadership, King Potato Te Wherowhero, who initiated what would become the Māori Warden Scheme, what started off as the Waitene Māori, and they were roles within hapu designed to support whānau, keep our whānau safe and prevent alcohol from entering our marae and into our communities. King Tāwhio wore the temperance ribbon in 1866. Te Whiti o Rongomai forbid alcohol at Parihaka in the 1860s. Te Poia banned it from Tūranga Waiwai in 1929. So Apirana Ngata was the first to secure a bylaw banning alcohol on marae in 1901, and he maintained prohibition in the East Coast right through 1911, where it was retained, and through to 1922. And so all these examples highlight and illustrate Māori leadership outside of any central policy or Crown-led control or management of alcohol. This was about hapu, iwi, and Māori leadership petitioning and gaining prohibition in their rohe during a time in our history where alcohol was prevalent. So this was not normal. This was a unique illustration of the power of rangatiratanga among Māori. We had, as another example, 168 Māori in Wanganui in 1874, and every South Island iwi by 1879 had petitioned for prohibition. So while we saw across the country alcohol use and alcohol harms rising and becoming prevalent, we saw a contrast to that in areas where we had that Māori leadership. We saw a rise in sobriety, particularly in the 1870s and 1880s, where perhaps it's regarded as one of the periods in which alcohol was most prevalent. And so my point of raising this is really to say that it's really important to look at our policy and what it is or isn't achieving for Māori. And what I'm highlighting is the opportunities for policy to better harness what we know to be the solutions for Māori. So how do we pull those two together? Because these examples show Māori mechanisms of curbing harm or controlling alcohol and its harms. And so imagine if we had a system, a Crown system or a government system that were to harness this leadership and these contributions and this expertise, which we still carry today, and there are contemporary examples today. And I just want to very briefly touch on the contrast in the Crown response to alcohol across that same era or period. So when I look at some of the key legislations, starting in 1847, we had the Sale of Spirits to Natives Ordinance Act, and this banned Māori and only Māori from buying or selling alcohol. And so what does that do? It gives Pākehā the sole control. It diminishes Māori abilities to develop tikanga in relation to how we manage alcohol. So was it a successful policy? Well, arguably not. And that's been shared in other forums as well. In 1870, we had the Outlying Districts Sales of Spirits Act, which required licence applicants to gain, a Māori permission from a Māori assessor. And so on the surface, that sounds and feels a little bit better. It's got Māori engagement, but it's still on Crown terms. Crown is still defining the licensing systems that Māori are required to participate in, not necessarily as a full decision-making authority over the outcomes and impacts, but more just to participate in a process which says this is the role for Māori within that. So it's still limiting. It's still not enabling full rangatiratanga. The Native Licensing Act in the later 1870s prohibited alcohol in areas where there were more than a third Māori residing. And so what's this doing? It's still framing alcohol as a Māori problem and something that we have to control and protect Māori from. It's not acknowledging that alcohol is a societal problem, that everyone has a role to play. And so the Native Licensing Act continued to create pathways for Māori to lead restrictions, but still only within the bounds by which the Crown define they are able to do so. So it required Māori to mobilise within a system that wasn't grounded in tikanga, wasn't grounded in our mātauranga, wasn't grounded in our communities, hapu, iwi, but rather was a top-down, Crown-led response that said Māori can participate in this particular way for this particular outcome and as defined by us. So then in 1900, we saw the Māori Councils Act, and so there is a growing momentum. There is a sharing of some decision-making authority with Māori as time goes on. And so this act allowed committee marae authority over liquor and liquor interactions in local health. And so it represented a shift. For the first time, we had Māori in governance structures, but it's still constrained. It's still bounded and defined and determined by local government. So we're not yet seeing the full potential of rangatiratanga informing and determining local alcohol policy. I'll probably stop there. It goes on, but essentially if we look at a history of Crown response to alcohol, we see the the Māori agency and the Māori decision-making authority being determined and framed and scoped by the Crown, and that's not rangatiratanga. So there's a limitation to all of those ways in which the Crown sought to engage Māori. And just taking us back to the Māori-led solutions, these were 100% designed, initiated, delivered, and driven by Māori for Māori. So they weren't the same constraints being placed on how they did that. And so in contemporary society, Māori leadership are still seeking to manage alcohol in our societies as an imposed harm. It's not about framing it as a deficit among Māori, whereas alcohol is to be policed and limiting Māori authority. It's actually about how can we create a policy system which enables rangatiratanga to come through, which enables Māori to determine how alcohol is managed by Māori for Māori. And that brings me to the present day, the sale and supply of alcohol. And there's no tiriti clause in there. So we're still operating in a Crown-defined parameter. We manage the sale and supply of alcohol. And by not having a te tiriti clause in there, it's a silencing of inherent Māori rights to be at the table and to be contributing to what Māori-led solutions and approaches to controlling alcohol look like. And so if I think about what would it look like if te tiriti was embedded in current law and central to policy, alcohol policy, we would see mana motuhake, rangatiratanga at the forefront. We would have, instead of Māori being policed over alcohol, Māori would be at the table being consulted about it, sharing authority over or licensed, opening hours, sponsorship, marketing, the presence of alcohol in our society. Māori would be at the table determining what that looked like. We would have active protection and equity at the forefront. It would oblige the Crown to act on the fact that Māori suffer disproportionate harm from alcohol and that we also have intergenerational and disproportionate harm. It would require the Crown to respond to that. And that could look like equitable funding to help or empower our kaupapa Māori responses to alcohol harm in ways that could even the playing field in terms of creating a more equitable response and outcome. Partnership, that would be a given because I keep saying it, Māori would be at the table. Māori voice would be informing the decisions around accessibility. So having te tiriti in policy would ensure that Māori were co-designers of policy, that kaupapa Māori services and responses and initiatives were equitably resourced. We would have mana whenua at our DLC district licensing committees. We would have mana whenua informing the outcome of those decisions. So I guess a key shift would be moving from Māori exercising their rangatiratanga outside the policy response to alcohol in Aotearoa to Māori being directly situated within it and having equal authority in determining what that looks like. So I guess without going on too much more, what we would see perhaps is a reframing. So it was really cool to hear, Daniela, what's happened in Lithuania, and we've got some really core policy initiatives which directly led to a reduction. And alongside those possibilities in Aotearoa, there's another opportunity here for Māori to say, actually, let's completely reframe what alcohol use looks like in Aotearoa. Let's put our mukapuna and our tamariki at the forefront of that. Let's restrict alcohol where in areas and spaces that don't align with whānau ora or pai ora. Let's get licensing that is attuned to our pai ora aspirations. And so that, I would say, goes alongside some of the more not traditional, well-known and well-understood policy levers that we know reduce alcohol harm. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe, Dr. Sarah, e mihi nui ana ki a koe. I really appreciated hearing the whakapapa and the hitori of our advocacy within alcohol harm across our whenua of Aotearoa. So mihi nui ana, you answered our pātai around how can we embed te tiriti in alcohol policy and law to ensure hauora and mana motuhake. So I do hope that our whānau watching are listening and taking notes. Mihi nui ana, I'm going to head over to Dr. Anya. Tēnā koe, Dr. Sarah. Dr. Anya, morena, over to you now. What does the modelling tell us about the potential health and equity benefits of a package of policies to reduce alcohol harm, for instance, availability, marketing, and price? That's easy to answer, right?
Kia ora. So I've got a few slides because I thought it will help to keep me on track. I'm going to speak to some work that we actually finished a couple of years ago that looked at some interventions and what the potential health impacts would be. Now, clearly, we don't have Lithuania's example of, there's lots of policies that we could have enacted after the 2010 Law Commission that we didn't enact. But I think that it's sometimes useful to take that sort of forwards lens and go, okay, well, if we implemented these policies, what could we expect to see happen, and what would the potential benefits of that be? First, mihi to the other people who worked on the project. The report was released, like I say, a few years ago, and I'm happy to share that or the manuscript with anyone who's interested afterwards. So the aim of the project was to look at what are the health impacts of some key interventions. Like I said, we were focused very much on the health impacts, and we didn't think about, in this particular piece of work, we didn't look at their economic impacts. In subsequent work that's currently under review, we have been looking at what the health system cost impacts are. So I'll bring in some of those results too. What did we do? Well, we first looked at business as usual. We had 2018 data on the consumption of alcohol, on disease patterns, and we said, okay, well, if 2018 continued into the future, then there would be a certain level of alcohol harm that would continue, and under different interventions, that picture of harm would look different. If there was less alcohol consumed, we'd have fewer instances of the cancers that are caused by alcohol, fewer injuries caused by alcohol, fewer instances of liver cirrhosis, and so on. And this particular project was about giving an idea of, like, okay, if we look at those particular health impacts, what does the total picture look like? And the way that, the sort of modelling way that we can express what the overall health impact of something is that we can measure it in health-adjusted life years, where one health-adjusted life year is 1 year spent in perfect health. So, no winter colds, no nothing, 1 year in perfect health, that's what one heli is. Which interventions did we look at? We held a series of stakeholder workshops, and we also thought about what some of those WHO best buys were. And within the stakeholder workshops, there were Māori stakeholder workshops and more general stakeholder workshops. And there were a few key messages and key interventions that kept coming up again and again. That was around increasing tax, reducing the availability of alcohol, and also restricting marketing. So again, I don't think that set of interventions are particularly surprising to anyone. They're sort of limited in terms of, for this particular modelling, we weren't thinking about some of the intricacies of where and how some of those things might happen. So we weren't thinking about how the licensing process might be changed in order to restrict the number of outlets, for instance. What we were looking at is, okay, if we implemented an intervention to, say, reduce the number of alcohol outlets, how much would that reduce average alcohol consumption? So again, what we had to go on here was we had a look at the various international evidence that had been published around some of these interventions. So internationally, what had happened when other places had increased tax. We had some information from the Law Commission in terms of what they thought the reduction in alcohol consumption would be if tax was increased, and again, some work from Ministry of Justice later on. And again, some international examples of restricting availability and reducing availability and restricting marketing. So this was the set of interventions that we looked at, and essentially the effect size is our best guess of how much average consumption would decrease if we implemented those interventions. So again, increasing tax by 50%. Our best estimate is that would reduce average alcohol consumption by just over 7.5%. Reducing the density of alcohol outlets down from what we think is probably around 63 outlets per 100,000, all the way down to 5 outlets per 100,000, gives us a 8.6% reduction in average alcohol consumption, and so on and so forth. And then we also looked at an overall package. So if we did those 4 things together, what do we think the effect would be? And here we weren't necessarily, there is the potential that these policies together might have a bigger effect than all of them combined, because it would really, like, for all of those things to happen, it would really represent quite a shift in how we treat alcohol. But we just looked at it, okay, well, sequentially, if we introduce these and assume that they're not interacting with each other, we think that it would be about a 30% reduction in consumption. So unsurprisingly, all of these interventions end up having large health gains. The overall package has the biggest health gains because it's the cumulative impact of those 4. We also saw that it ends up increasing life expectancy. It also ends up reducing the inequities in life expectancy between Māori and non-Māori. So about 30% more health gains per capita for Māori compared to non-Māori. And these trends, occurred across all of those interventions. We saw similar patterns, and it's because we weren't able to account for the differential exposure. So we know that, for instance, there's some communities that have much higher levels of alcohol outlet density than others. Many areas that have high outlet density also have high Māori populations. We didn't look at the differential effectiveness or the price sensitivity. So in other countries, lower income households have been found to respond more, i.e. reduce their consumption more when alcohol price goes up compared to higher income countries. And for lots of these things, we didn't have sufficient information to examine exactly what the magnitude of some of those differences were. So it's really broad brush in terms of what the differential impacts were. Like I say, we used international evidence on those effect sizes. So again, in the peer review, comments came up about how generalizable are the international studies about, restricting marketing to our context. And I guess our response to this was to say, well, it could be higher or lower. Whether it's 7%, 8%, 10%, 3%, we can see that any percentage change in alcohol consumption is going to give you some health gains. And so if you think that the effect sizes might be larger, well, that's going to give you higher health gains than what we modelled. If you think that the effect size is smaller, that's going to give you lower health gains than what we modelled. Like I say, in all likelihood, these interventions would have differential impacts on different groups within the population that we weren't able to account for. And we weren't even able to account for some of those differences in baseline exposure. So again, we know that marketing is more heavily concentrated in some areas than others. So therefore, if we completely ban marketing, you'd think that we'd see differential impacts. We also didn't cover the non-health impacts. So again, tax interventions especially have been critiqued in terms of having potential non-health impacts in terms of household budgets and things like that. That was sort of out of scope for this particular piece of work. What we did do, though, is that it does enable us to do what I describe as a best guess of what would happen if we implemented some of these interventions in the New Zealand context. So we did have information on alcohol consumption, information on what our disease patterns are. We had some ability to stratify that consumption by age, sex, and ethnicity, and using that sort of forwards methodological approach where we're saying, okay, well, if you introduce these interventions tomorrow, this is what the health gains would look like going forwards. And like I said, we did see that higher per capita health gains for Māori, but it's still not a complete picture of what the potential benefits would be, or the potential harms from particular implementations of those interventions. So hopefully not too surprisingly for anyone in this audience, but there's substantial potential for health gain from policies to reduce alcohol consumption. Again, subsequent work that we're doing has shown that you also end up saving the health system a lot of money. Policies to reduce alcohol consumption are likely to reduce health inequities. But here I think a lot of Sarah's commentary is incredibly important. It's not just a case of implementing these interventions in a sort of paternalistic way, like actually for these interventions to work and for us to have really comprehensive policy, Māori need to be, they're making decisions at the table, and not just a case of, oh, we'll just write it here into the legislation because some modelling study said that it would be good. And again, despite the uncertainties in the modelling, I think that there's strong evidence for action. There's been strong evidence for action for a long time. And I don't think that the uncertainty in whether, like we're going to see this percentage reduction or that percentage reduction is a reason to not actually implement things that we know will be beneficial. So I'll wrap up there, stop sharing, and happy to answer any pātai.
Kia ora, Dr. Anya. Thank you so much for all of the knowledge that you've poured into us this morning. Personally, watching your presentation makes me excited, and I really appreciated the point that you said around Māori need to be at the table to make decisions. E mihi nui ana, Dr. Anya. E te whānau, we are running a couple minutes behind time. Move straight into Q&A and answer some of the questions that have popped up on our live this morning. For those of you Morena kia tātou. Please feel free to open the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Type in a question. If we can't get to them this morning, then our panelists and our crew will email you the answers. So mihi ana kia tātou. I'm going to move to our first question that hasn't been answered by Liz Gordon. I think this is for you, Daniela. We tend to see alcohol disease in chronic rather than acute. For example, cirrhosis of the liver. Your evidence of disease, I assume that says reduction, your evidence of disease reduction appears to refute this. Is this correct?
Thank you very much, and thank you, and also thank you for the question. So yes, it's actually true. What we see in Lithuania, so what I presented today was just a couple of examples of some studies that we did because we didn't have time for that. But Lithuania is a very well studied case and has more than 30 or 40 publications on impact of the alcohol control laws. And we do see impacts of these alcohol control laws, in both chronic and acute diseases. We see impacts from liver cirrhosis of the liver, as I said, to causes like violence, including homicides and suicides. And we see the mortality by alcohol use disorders also reduced. So just trying to summarize that, yes, so the evidence refutes that the impact is only on chronic and rather than acute. It's actually on both. And we see that in Lithuania as a great example. I hope that answers the question.
Beautiful. Liz, if that did answer your question, awesome. If not, let us know in the comments. I'm going to move on to a question from Val Witiri. Val's pātai, kia ora Daniela. Were external support services required, such as social workers, to support whānau, families, possibly where alcohol was used as a suppressant for coping with issues or trauma? Ngā mihi.
That is also for me, right? Just double checking. Thank you. So yeah, I already typed something in the answer box, saying exactly that. Unfortunately, I I don't have the knowledge to answer that because the policies that we were evaluating were mostly population level policies or the population level impacts of the policies, meaning that we don't have, I at least don't have any information on individual level impacts. But of course that we know that these population level measures are not enough in cases of using alcohol as coping issues or trauma, and thus we always recognize that treatment services, social work, and community-based support remain essential along any policy package that is implemented in a country.
Kia ora, tautoko that. Wraparound support services are absolutely necessary for our whānau that are going through these things, and really appreciate the time you've taken to answer our pātai, Daniela. I have a pātai for both of you, Dr. Anya and Dr. Sarah, again from Val Witiri. How can we get Māori sitting at the decision-making table? How can we make this happen?
$1 million question. We can continue to advocate via the Waitangi Tribunal and the numerous claims around the breaches of Te Tiriti, because this is yet another example of a breach when we have Māori missing from the decision-making table. We can continue to support, oh gosh, I'm going to broach into territory I shouldn't, but the political arena is where we have an ability to directly influence policy outcomes. So continue to back our Māori in Parliament and support those to drive alcohol policy change within the Lion's Den. Kia ora.
Beautiful. Kia ora, Dr. Sarah. Dr. Anya, I might throw this next pātai over to you. What are some immediate community-led actions that can be taken to reduce alcohol harm that you could recommend as a panelist with high Māori and Pacific communities?
I think that the thing that I'll reiterate is the same comment that I made when I was presenting to Justice Select Committee. I think if at a national level we reduce those off-license trading hours to 9 to 9, it's a couple of characters in the legislation. That would be a really quick way to reduce alcohol harm. And I think that in terms of the ability for communities to make those decisions, I think making sure that communities are really empowered in those licensing processes, which they're not at the moment. I think, I know, incredibly bright, well-educated people with all the best information that have been trying to contest alcohol licenses. There's that have tried to contest alcohol licenses in communities where there's strong support to not have any more licenses that haven't succeeded. And I think that really shows how far behind we are where we should be in terms of giving communities that power to make decisions for themselves.
Kia ora, tautoko pautikaha. I have one last question before we wrap up for all of you. What one policy would you call for from the incoming government after the November election? I can see you've all got your thinking faces on. This is a hard question.
Well, maybe I can start, if that's okay. Yeah. So I'm not very familiar with the particular case of New Zealand, but I can give you the example of what I know from other high-income countries or other countries in Europe, is that even though we always talk about 3 best buy alcohol policies for alcohol reduction, and that the integrated package is important, and we have 3 best buys that are taxation, availability restrictions, and marketing restrictions. The best buy, the best of the best is alcohol taxation. At least that's how we see it in Europe, because it has the strongest. It's the strongest policy to drive consumption down at population level, because when the price of alcohol increases enough to impact affordability compared to other goods, the truth is that that's when consumption decreases. So if I had to talk to a government and try to convince them to apply one alcohol control policy that has the highest impact, and that has the highest impact on consumption, and at the same time that has an impact in revenue, where this revenue can be reinvested in the communities, invested in health systems, that would be alcohol taxation.
Kia ora, alcohol taxation. Kia ora, Daniela. Dr. Sarah, Dr. Anya, any whakaaro?
I would just add to that and say within Aotearoa, if we combined that alongside embedding te tiriti into our legislation, the Sale and Supply Act, then we've got a lethal combo for saying that not only are we going to use the known and evidence-based policy levers, but we're going to ensure that Māori are sitting at the table, sharing the decision-making authority and how that rolls out.
Kia ora. Oh, this is like listening to three just really cool people that I want to be around all the time. Tēnā koe, Dr. Sarah. Dr. Anya.
I'm going to tautoko Sarah's point. I'm also going to say that I would, if it was up to me, it would also depend who I'm talking to, because I think that I think that we could also make progress regardless of who ends up being elected. I'm trying to stay. I think we could be smart about how we pitch policies, so that we can actually have progress regardless of what happens. So definitely there's an eventuality where I feel like an ACC levy on alcohol might be the only policy lever that we might be able to pull. I'm more hopeful that actually we can have the policy levers of, embedding te tiriti, and hopefully a government where, a future government where that ends up being the first thing that's done in terms of reforming alcohol policy.
Tēnā koe, Dr. Anya, and tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā kai kōrero o tēnei ata. We really appreciate the time that you three have given to join us this morning on our webinar on behalf of the Health Coalition of Aotearoa. Anei tō koutou mihi, tēnā koutou katoa. And thank you to our whānau who have joined online. Really cool stuff, eh? Really cool stuff have popped up this morning. I hope you guys have been taking notes. I know I have. I've been taking photos in between every presentation. Again, Jesse Witiri tōku ingoa, thank you guys for having me on Health Coalition. I'm going to pass it back to the team to have our final words and closing karakia. I'm going to hand it over to the Health Coalition now. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, Jesse. Thank you to Daniela, Sarah, and Anya for your kōrero today. What has come through clearly this morning is that alcohol harm is not inevitable, and we should not accept it as normal. We've seen that when governments take bold action and when policy is comprehensive, real change is possible. For us here in Aotearoa, the challenge is to ensure that our response is guided by evidence, te tiriti, and the voices of the communities most affected by the harm. I want to thank everyone who joined us this morning. We appreciate your time and your commitment to prevention, equity, and better health outcomes. Karakia whakamutunga. Unuhia, 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 ki te urutapi nui, kia wātea, kia māma, te nākau te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatu, koe ara i runga whakairia ake ki runga kia teina. Haumi e hui e, tāheki e. Kia pai te rā.